This is my 2013 Ford Police Interceptor utility, and it has a few recalls that are open, and I'm going to take this in tomorrow to get the recalls done. But these are common recalls that are pretty much applicable to the vast majority of these Interceptors or Explorers, and there's a good chance that you're affected by them too if you have one of these vehicles. I want to quickly go over a couple of these, point out where they are, and give you a little bit of information before you take it into the dealer so you kind of know what you're up against. So the first thing is to even figure out if you have any open recalls on your vehicle. When you buy a vehicle and register it in your name, it goes into a database, and so you should be getting a piece of mail anytime a new recall comes out. But older recalls, you won't necessarily get mail. You might get one just because if it hasn't been addressed and ownership has changed, it might get sent to you. But generally, it's only when new recalls are released that they'll mail them to you. So just because you bought one doesn't mean that all the recalls have been taken care of. So what you're going to do is you're going to want to find the VIN number. There's quite a few places to find it. There's the sticker right up here by the tire chart. There's also your VIN number right here in the door jamb. And then there's also the VIN number right here in the bottom left corner of the windshield. So once you have your VIN number, go and throw it in on the website that I'll have linked below. It's a government website that shows if any recalls, regardless of the make or model. In the US, it's a law that they have to update that database to make sure that you can identify if you have any open recalls. So in my case, I had 3 recalls. Technically 2 recalls, and one is a customer satisfaction program for the catalytic converter, which I actually don't even qualify for, but it was showing up. It was qualified at one point. Even though it doesn't apply to me, I'll talk about that last. But the one that I'm really gonna take it in for is the rear toe links. So the rear toe link is part of the suspension. So if you come back to your rear tire and crawl down, turn on my light here. This right here is your rear toe link. And this is just a stabilizing link, and it goes to the steering knuckle, which, you know, these are the rear tires, so it's not really much steering, but it helps with the tracking of the tires. And what happens is in areas where they use salt, these can corrode. And so what will happen is you take it into the dealer for this recall, and they will first off take this off and the bolt and throw it away and get new ones. Then they will do an additional test where they torque the bolt and see if the ball joint twists. And if the ball joint twists, then they will also disregard and replace the entire knuckle. Well, in order to replace the knuckle, you need to do an alignment. So if definitely you're gonna get new rear end links if this applies to your vehicle. And then additionally, you may get a rear knuckle as well, which is awesome. Also, these are steel bearings pressed into an aluminum knuckle. And so what happens is a lot of times galvanic corrosion occurs, and it's almost impossible and not worth their time to separate them. So you could get a lot of new components, like a new bearing, wheel bearing and everything like that. However, they've really only approved in the service bulletin to replace the hardware like the bolts, as well as the actual knuckle and the end links. So it's a good opportunity to get a free alignment. I don't know if they'll just align the rear end or if they'll do all 4 wheels. My guess is probably just the rear end, but it's pretty great to be getting a bonus alignment, which could already be, you know, $100 to $200 depending on your area. Now this recall for the toe link supposedly only applies to 13 to 17. So if you have an 18 or 19, supposedly this doesn't apply, but it's worth a check. Now moving to the front of the vehicle, you may have noticed a lot of Explorers and Interceptors driving around that are missing this A-pillar trim piece. So this is referred to the A-pillar, that would be B-pillar, C, D, and it goes on. This is considered an A-pillar, and these trims are very prone to popping off, and you can actually see that mine's actually pretty loose here, and it's kind of coming loose up here. Now, if you have an Interceptor, you probably got it with a spotlight. And you may have kept the spotlight, you may have removed it, maybe someone else removed it, but there's a good chance that you have a hole right here. Now, I went to a junkyard and got a replacement one and you know, popped it in here, but you know, I replaced it with a faulty one. You know, the old one would have been faulty, but the replacement that I used was, you know, obviously still faulty as well. So it should be covered. I I don't know exactly how a dealer will respond if it's got a hole drilled in it, because maybe they'll consider that being altered and maybe voided the warranty, but I couldn't find any information and documentation at the dealer if that, if any kind of modifications void it. If you have experience at the dealer with someone rejecting you because of the modification from the spotlight, drop it in the comments because I'd be interested to know. But if we come over to my other side, this side actually has been whistling because this was popping up, and you can see mine's really loose. So I actually already put a little piece of tape here. And the thing that I've come to find out about these is it's not if, it's when this is just gonna fly off in the freeway one day. You're probably not gonna be able to recover it. It's probably gonna get smashed. And so from what I can tell so far, they don't really have a true remedy yet. They're working on a replacement part that doesn't fall off so easy. And that's a little bit easier said than done because it's not just this piece. Underneath this outer piece, there's an inner piece that this one clips onto. And my guess is they're having to re-engineer both halves. And so it's gonna take a while for that to come out. Plus they're gonna have to make, I think it's like 500,000 of vehicles affected by this. So I think what they're doing right now is if you do go into the dealer based on warranty, is they're just looking to see if yours is affected, and then they're adding it to a list that you'll get called later to have the parts when they come in. So in order to reserve your spot, what I would recommend is if you're going in already, I would take some tape like I've done here and place it on the sides that kind of shows that you are having issues. Even if you're not having issues yet, you're probably going to have issues, and you don't want to get marked on a list that you're of a non-problematic pillar. And I don't know if they operate like that, but I think it might be a good call. I kind of have to do it out of necessity because otherwise I get a whistling noise and this thing looks like it's about to come off. So that's the recall on that. Like I said, the fix isn't completely out yet, but I think they are bringing people in just to inspect, to add you to the list so that you can get in line for parts. So in my opinion, the most important recall actually isn't even a recall. It's a customer satisfaction program. And pretty much what that means is that it doesn't qualify as a safety issue, so it's not a recall, but it's something that failed due to engineering flaws or design flaws that Ford has stepped up and said that they will make right by adding an extended warranty for a specific component. And in this case, it's the catalytic converters. And so you have bank one catalytic converter back here behind the engine. You can't see it right here, but it is tucked back it's part of the exhaust manifold. And then on this exhaust manifold right here, bank two, it's just down further below. And so you can see this is actually the O2 sensor, the pre-sensor, or bank one, if you want to call it, or sensor one in bank two. And then there'll be another sensor down below. And so this program only applies to the 3.7 liter engine under 120,000 miles, which does exclude a lot right off the bat. Because usually these things retired usually around 100,000 miles, and then you've probably been driving them for a little while. But pretty much what happens is the codes will turn on either P0430 or P0420. And what those are is the oxygen sensors, the O2 sensors, letting the system know that the catalytic converters are getting plugged up. Catalytic converters are pretty expensive to change. If you do change them, you want to use OEM because the aftermarkets are generally garbage and they only last for a year or two. And they're pretty expensive, and it's kind of labor intensive to get these out. It's not too bad, but it's not something you want to do for fun. So when these codes throw, it's usually more or less a death sentence for the catalytic converters, and you're kind of working on borrowed time. The reason why these come up, especially at these, even at 100,000 miles, is because catalytic converters work best when they are hot. So they get hot, they burn the extra fuel, and that's better for the emissions and environment, supposedly. So we know that they work better when they're hot, but we also know that these Interceptors spend a lot of their time just idling, sitting in parking lots, all night long while they're on duty. And so the catalytic converters never get really hot enough to burn all the excess fuel, and so they get plugged prematurely with extra soot and carbon and stuff. And so this program, this customer satisfaction program, will add 11 years extended coverage on the catalytic converters, like I said, as long as it's under 120,000 miles or less than 11 years old. So I am exempt from this, or I don't qualify for this program because this is a 2013, so it's already aged out, and it's got 140 something thousand miles, so it's mild out. But I wanted to show you how to figure out if you qualify. Now, the coverage is based on the delivery date, which is not the manufacturing date. It's probably several months after the manufacture date. Only Ford has that information, so you kind of have to reach out to your dealer to see if you still qualify. So even if you have a 2014, you may qualify into 2015, but you have to call to check. And in order for you to qualify, you have to have these codes on, either 0420, which is for bank 1, I believe, which is the bank back there, and then P0430, which is bank 2, which I believe is that one right there. It's been a while since I've dealt with this, so I'm kind of rusty on those. But pretty much it's based on the date it was delivered, not manufactured. So let's say my manufacture date is 2014, but it actually didn't go into service. It wasn't delivered to the department until January of 2025. So you actually would be covered. But even though it's based on the service or the delivery date, this is just kind of a general guide. So if you have a 2015, at the time of this video, you should be covered as long as you're under 120,000 miles. You might be covered if you're 2014, but you better get on it and check. Now, if you don't have one of these codes on, there's no point of really checking. But if it does pop on, don't delay because you might be really close to the window. If you have 15, 16, 17, 18, as of right now, you're good. Now, the 2019 is interesting because it is covered. However, it's under a different program. So this satisfaction program is called 19M01, and for some reason, because of the plants or the parts used or something, it's actually a different program for the catalytic converter, and it's program 22M06. And that's good till 2030, so you've got a lot of time. So if you have a 2018 or 19, you've got a lot of time left, which is great. But once again, you can't exceed 120,000 miles. So if you're going in for this customer satisfaction program, a lot of times, well, first off, it's not going to show up on the recalls generally, but if you call up the service department and ask them and give them these reference numbers for the customer satisfaction program and your VIN, they can look up and see if it applies. They usually won't volunteer that information unless you specifically call in to ask. And once again, you have to have the codes on. But let's say you have the codes on and you're no longer qualify for this program because you're too high of miles or too old of a vehicle. Well, there are a couple other options. First off, a lot of times when these catalytic converters plug up, it's not, you won't even notice any performance difference because it's just saying that it's starting to sense a reduced flow and different fuel mixture and lack of burned mixture at the number 2 sensor. So that won't necessarily affect performance, but the vehicle can tune itself to say that things aren't trimmed properly, which can affect fuel economy. So you want to get that light turned off. So there's a couple of things you can do. So one thing you can do is on the number 2 sensor, you can put one of these sensor defoulers. These things, technically, you're not supposed to be using them. But if you're in a state or a county that doesn't require emissions, you can use this and it will generally turn off your code. These are generally used to essentially remove the sensor from the stream, and so it kind of fools the system into thinking that there's not an issue. So if nothing else, it doesn't affect the cleanliness of the catalytic converter, but it will let the ECU know that it can continue working normally. And yeah, you're probably still going to plug up your catalytic converter down the line, but this buys you a little bit more time without having terrible gas economy. Now, another thing you can do, which I don't even really want to suggest it, other than the fact that I've had really good results with it, is that you can force clean or chemically clean the catalytic converters. And this is a highly debated topic, and so, like I said, I don't really want to endorse it other than the fact that it worked for me and I didn't have any issues. But pretty much what you do is when you're at about half a tank of gas, you put in a gallon of lacquer thinner. You can go down to Walmart and just buy a can of lacquer thinner, a gallon, and you just add it to your fuel tank. Now, lacquer thinner is a much more aggressive solvent than gasoline, and so it will clean out all of the little honeycomb filters that are inside of the catalytic converter. Now, I did this and it worked for me on my first trip, and there's a few things that if you do attempt this, I would recommend. First off, just be aware that you are putting a more aggressive solvent through your fuel system, so might not be the best idea, but a lot of mechanics have told me that it's worked just fine without issues. But what I would recommend is do it right before you take a long road trip where you're gonna burn the next half tank of gas. And so don't pour in the gallon of lacquer thinner and just let it sit in there for days or weeks. Put it in and then drive it, and so it's gone, so it doesn't have a lot of time to kind of sit and soak on around your fuel pump, plastic components. Even though all of the fuel lines and everything are solvent rated, it's not a great idea to just let it sit in there. So you want to put it in and then instantly go and use it. You're also going to want to drive at higher or like freeway speeds, so everything get nice and hot, like your catalytic converter get really nice and hot and get everything cleaned up really nicely. If that doesn't work after about 2 attempts, then it might be too clogged and too far gone that you might not be able to salvage these catalytic converters, and you may have to replace them anyway. But I've noticed this particularly works best if you haven't noticed performance drop yet, but the codes are on. So I'll probably get some hate in the comments for that, but it has saved me from having to get catalytic converter on not this vehicle, but a different one that I had. And I actually did it in this vehicle as well after I had put the defoulers in, and I'd put it on bank 2 but not on bank 1. I got a code for bank 1 and it went away, and so I could probably take that defouler off on bank 2, and I think it would actually probably be fine at this point because it would have cleaned them both up. So the defoulers, because they are modifying the emission system, is technically illegal federally and state-wise as well if you're in a state that requires emissions and stuff like that. So if you require emissions in your state, probably not the best idea to do that, because they're supposed to, at the emission stations, they're supposed to check for defoulers because they are a pretty widely known secret. It's not much of a secret anymore. And you can fail your test if you do that, which isn't a big deal, but you do have to take it back off. Now, on one of my family members' cars, they put that defouler on there in a state in Utah where they needed to have the test. Then they took it in, it failed the test. They took it back off to go, you know, see if they could test it again. But then the light took months to come back on. So it worked out. They were able to pass their test. And, you know, we actually thought that somehow it fixed the issue. But it took months for the catalytic converter light to come back on. So if you're in a real pinch, you might be able to put one of these foulers on, or defoulers, drive it around until the codes turn off or clear the codes, drive it around for a little bit, and then take off the defouler and put the O2 sensor back in before you go take your test. Now this is a band-aid, and I don't really want to recommend cheating the test, but I understand that you don't always have a lot of money, and sometimes you just need to get to work, and you're saving up for new catalytic converters. So that's about it. There are some more recalls that are a little bit more sparse, that are more dependent on your year or VIN number, that are for some other things over the years. Like there's a rack and pinion issue for I think 2016 and 17s. There's a fuel module cracking issue for I think 17s or 18s. There's going to be some that are way less common, but they may apply to you, but you should get notices, especially if you check that website that we already talked about. It's always a good idea when you get a new vehicle just to check the recalls. And I've had the car back from the dealer for a little while. I was waiting to hear back about the pillar trim. I'll tell you about that in a little minute, but I wanted to show you real quick what they ended up doing. So if we look under the vehicle again, they're a little dirty now after using for a little bit of time. The new end links right there is that fork going back is a little dirty right now. But so they replaced those. They did not end up replacing the knuckle, which means that they did the test to see if the knuckle itself had corrosion, and it did not. So they only replaced the hardware and the toe link. And so that's been replaced on the back. And then as part of that, they do an alignment. And it's not super clear if it's just a rear end alignment. However, they did not initially give me the paperwork back, but I asked for it, which I would recommend doing because they might not offer that. And they show the before and after, and they did make some corrections. The front end did not seem to really change all that much. So once again, I'm not sure if they really tweaked anything, but it did change a little bit. So I think they did, but they didn't specify. And the rear end was already pretty straight. So they did that. This is what they have for the pillar moldings. As you can see, everything is on back order. And they said that potentially in January, and this was done in July. So it's now September, or I guess it's October now, and I haven't heard anything back. And I might even end up selling this vehicle, so I might not be able to get that done during my ownership. So just so you're aware that if you do have this pillar recall, which I mean you do, everyone does, that you may want to get into dealers sooner than later, so you can get on the list of long list of vehicles. Because keep in mind, this is not just for Interceptors, this is for all 5th generation Explorers have this recall for the pillars, so you might not want to wait on that because it's going to be even longer before you can get in. Hopefully this helps with any recalls that you may be dealing with, and your reminder that they are free, and sometimes you can get bonus alignments and other work done. Anyway, I hope this was helpful for you, and good luck.